Morning, everyone, and welcome to Hit and Hustle from IrSportsDaily.com. I'm your host, Greg Flammang, and with me, as always, is Jamie Uyeyama, Jamie University, on this wonderful Tuesday. It's raining here in Southern California, but that's okay. We are here. We are going to talk about PFF grades exclusively for the duration of the show. It's just going to be I've changed the outline of the show. It's just going to be PFF grades for the whole hour. That's all we're going to talk about. So, CMAC, thank you for coming, and I guess I'll see you later. Because you're out. I don't know.
It's a
what
wild
that's
thing
in
to
reference
put
to.
before the show.
And that's cool, man. I wasn't gonna bring up PFF grades, but now maybe I should. So that's that. But thank you everyone for tuning in. We're gonna talk about who Notre Dame has brought into the portal so far. What that means for the roster and what the kind of how things are shaping up as far as safety and wide receiver. We're going to talk about the possibility of CJ Williams visiting over the weekend. And I would say if that happens, then that's a very good chance that he ends up at Notre Dame because first of all, if he's already gone on 2 visits, he's already gone to West Virginia, he's already gone to Wisconsin, and semester is going to start soon, so he's got to make a choice. So if he hasn't chosen one of those schools, he's been to Notre Dame already, so he knows what Notre Dame's all about. Obviously, he was committed to Notre Dame last year. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about his fit, and then we could talk a little bit about the national title game that went on last night. So if you like what you hear, hit the like button. If you haven't done so already, hit subscribe button. Subscribe to the show. We're going to be doing this all off season. And if you're watching on replay, thank you very much for doing that. You can do the same. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. All right, Jamie. I want to start with the game last night. 65-7. Georgia was plus 400 total yards. They had 11. They had 11 real possessions, right? So I'm not counting the last possession of the game because the clock just ran out and they took knees and stuff, even though they were driving. So they were driving, and so I'm not going to count that. They had 11 possessions, touchdowns on 9, field goal on 1 punt, which is funny because it was the first possession of the second half. So they didn't even take advantage of the of deferring. Jamie blew it. Absolutely blew the game management on that one, but not good from TCU. I mean, look, it's one thing to be overmatched. I mean, that was 65-7. I mean, my goodness, they couldn't stop them. And here's a funny thing too, and we were talking about this in the chat. I think, and at one point, I mean, when I guess it was 55-7 or whatever the score was. 56-7 when I sent this message, like Georgia receivers at that point had 2 catches for 25 yards that were scholarship guys. So like Ladd McConkey was a walk-on. And Rijon says they covered the spread each half. They might have covered the spread each quarter. Because the spread was what,
other than the first, they did.
Yeah, I think they probably covered the spread each quarter. So but yeah, Ladd McConkey is a walk-on. He obviously earned a scholarship, but scholarship players that they recruited had 2 catches for 25 yards in the game. They put up 580 or 590 or whatever it was. And it's interesting because this is kind of the offense that you've kind of argued with Matt about in previous years. Tight end heavy offense and being explosive.
Tight ends being explosive?
I know, it's crazy. It's nuts, right? Like who would have thought? So that's I don't think the coach ran it up a bit. Did you think he ran it up? Do you think Kirby ran it up? I don't think he was outrageous. I mean, I don't think
they did anything outrageous. Also, it's the national title game.
Yeah, man.
If this was a regular season conference game or even a non-conference third game of the year, okay, back the dogs off a little bit. It's the national championship game. I do have a problem with coaches kind of running it up and running it into, like, rubbing into people's faces sometimes, like when I don't think it's appropriate. I didn't think there was anything wrong with and I just think they couldn't stop them.
Yeah.
I just think they couldn't stop him.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like, I think also it wasn't like they were like deep shot after deep shot, like you said with the receivers. Like they weren't like it wasn't. They were just running their offense, Like it was. They were just that much better. They were that much better.
I mean, it was a clinic, right? I mean, the Georgia offensive coordinator. Why can't I think of his name? I know his name. Grant. No, that's not his name. Monken. Todd Monken.
Yeah, Todd Monken.
I mean, he was on one. He had a good feel for them. He obviously, and everything he called worked. TCU wasn't taking anything away. They were blowing coverages. It just, it was one of those things where, again, you score 9 touchdowns on 11 possessions. I mean, that's you're not giving them anything, and you're not giving them any sort of rough go of it. Zapatos 1290 says Michigan must be asking some serious questions this morning. I mean, I think Ohio State probably feels extra bitter today, given they were in control for a lot of their game and they let it slip away. So that's got to be tough for them. Michigan, I think they're asking serious questions about whether or not they're going to have a head coach in the coming days. So they've got a lot
Michigan
going on.
is probably happy. They would have got destroyed in this game. Yeah. They would have got destroyed. And I think if you look at it, Michigan, there is something to like, Michigan, they beat Ohio State fair and square, whatever they did, but they weren't more talented than Ohio State. They played better than Ohio State that day. Ohio State was the closest team in terms of talent to Georgia that Georgia played in this thing. Michigan would have got boat raced too. It wouldn't have been 60 whatever, but it would have been bad. They would have lost by 3-4 touchdowns at least. Yeah. And so that's kind of I mean, I think you look at like Oregon. Oregon wasn't a bad team. They were pretty good. They were a top 15-ish team, and they got boat raced too, right? Like, I think if you look at like TCU, even look at that TCU Michigan game. Michigan gave them that game. Like TCU played great, and Michigan played bad, and that's kind of how that's why they won that game. Yeah. And TCU, whatever, all credit to them, they deserved it. But people wanted to. It would have been a nice Cinderella story, but they needed to like play Georgia first, and then Georgia to just be like not take them seriously at all, and then that happened. As soon as that happened, it got into the. I don't know. I should have put my mortgage on this game. I know there's no way that I just saw them winning this game. I just didn't think that they just didn't have the horses. Yeah. And I like Max Duggan is a really great player. He's a really great player. And I mean, he couldn't do anything. Like it just there was nothing they could do. Even if you think about the one scoring drive they had, it was a busted coverage. Yeah. Like that was pretty much the reason why they got that drive, right? So it's just one of these things. Like I'm doing this piece for ISD, working on it right now, and it's like the checklist of like all of like what you need to have in the college football era in order to like win the national championship. Like what have all these teams had? And I mean, TCU, you've got to have like out of like 8 things, most teams have all 8, but then the other ones have like 7 of 8 or whatever, right? Like that kind of thing. TCU probably has like 3 of 8. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, so what were the odds that they were going to win? They needed everything to go their way. They needed everything to go their way.
Chris, to answer your question, we haven't gotten to any portal talk. We haven't gotten to any Notre Dame. I wanted to lead with the national title game because I felt like as soon as we got into Notre Dame, going back to national would be disjointed and that wouldn't work. So I wanted to start out with this, and then we get into Notre Dame. So thank you for that question. And here's the thing too, is I guess I'll relate it to Notre Dame a little bit because I tweeted something similar to this, is like, Notre Dame fans, when they get into the playoffs, it's been, if only they had the quarterback, if only they had a better quarterback, if only Ian Book was a chance taker and they would open up the offense and do all these other things. TCU was exactly what on offense, exactly what fans have wanted Notre Dame to be. They threw deep all the time. They threw it. They were an explosive team. They were always over the top. Quentin Johnson was having a huge season. Max Duggan was a risk taker. It didn't matter. It didn't matter because of the things you said. They were all those things. Max Duggan, runner up for the Heisman Trophy. Okay.
Yeah.
65-7. If you run into a buzzsaw like this, if you are up against a great team, like Notre Dame was up against the 2018 Clemson team with that defense and the 2020 Alabama team with 3 Heisman finalists on it, and that defense, you're up against it. Like, it's like you said with the checklist, like these teams have, like you said, 7 things, 7 of 8. 8 of 8, 6 of 8. Notre Dame and TCU, like teams like that, they have like 2 of 8, 3 of 8, right? And that's where you're trying to get, right? You can get to the game, but then you're up against these teams that just have so much more than you. And not just that, but once you get into the championship rounds, I feel like this is when the support staff difference of the whole program makes such a big, it really widens the gap, because they have so many more resources to get prepared for these types of moments and these types of games. And so programs like TCU, programs like Notre Dame, and I know we think of Notre Dame as like a blue blood, but they don't have the type of they don't have Georgia resources. They don't have Alabama resources.
They don't spend the same amount of money.
They don't do that. So it really widens the gap there. And so that's where it's like, look, that you see where Notre Dame has to get. And I think that's why when Notre Dame plays Georgia in the regular season, right, we've seen it, 20-19, 23-17. The gap isn't as much. But once you get into the later rounds, that's when it really makes a difference. So,
yeah.
I don't know. That's where it is. Rajon said Kirby had the boys ready. They would have beaten anyone last night. That may not be true. So Xander Cruz, this is a common thing, right? Why doesn't Notre Dame have those resources to spend the money? That's preaching to the choir, right? Like, I'm stating a fact, right? It's not I don't think it's okay or whatever. It's just true, right? Notre Dame is not going to be at the forefront of things like support staff and analysts and all those other things, right? We want them to spend money. They don't. It is what it is, right?
I mean, they spend more than most, right? It's just
right, and that's why they can get to the playoffs.
Yeah. The problem is just that it's like, afterwards I saw that like TCU admitted after the game that Georgia was in a different tier, and that's the problem. Is that right now? So here's the since the college football playoff, right? This is Ohio State is 1-1, Alabama's 1-3, Georgia's now 1-2, Clemson is 1-2, and LSU is 1-1. That's the list, right? That's the list. And Clemson, really, if you think about it, and not like Clemson isn't spending, they're obviously spending a lot, but they have fallen back. Yeah. Right? They have fallen back in a lot of ways, because it's not just obviously just spending. There's other pieces of it. But right now, you look at like Georgia and Alabama, and I would say Ohio State is in that tier, even though they haven't finished and whatever lately. Those teams are in different tiers in terms of like how they're recruiting, how good their offenses are. Those pieces of it is just, Stetson Bennett's a good player. He is a good player, right? But like, he ends up being great because of all the people around him, and how they kind of set that thing up, right? So, and that's where, not just Notre Dame, but everybody else, it's like they're in a tier below, and you got to work to get to that. Like, that's just the only thing, and it's hard. It's easier said than done. And it's like really like it's not an overnight thing. It's not like, you can just hire somebody and then all of a sudden, we got a new OC. People just want like, Reese isn't the guy, whatever. No, it's way more than that. If that's what you think is Notre Dame is lacking, like on offense, it's way more than that. It's way more than that. You need to be a top 8 offense, a top 15 defense. You need, and in order to have that, you have to have multiple first round picks on your team every year. You have to have, 10 guys getting picked in the NFL almost every year, right? Like that's kind of where you need to be. Like, and I think it's funny because everybody's talking about, the portal era and all this kind of stuff. Georgia took like no one in the portal last year, even though they had lost all these guys. It's because they had recruited. I mean, they got like 80% of the guys they have are blue chips, right?
They're at like 99 or 90 88% blue chip rate. Like
nuts. And then when you do that too, it's like they don't even have to hit on over half their guys because it's just they just got to hit on a third of them basically, and they're gonna be rolling, right? And like the fact that even if you think of like Nolan Smith, who's like considered one of the best pass rushers, this guy didn't even play. He didn't even play, right? Like that's just where they're at right now. And if you look at it, and that's the one thing too, which is funny because everyone could point to the Brian Kelly and look at that the 2017 game and the 2019 game and say like, oh, look how close Notre Dame is. Well, Georgia has gone like from here to here in that time. And this isn't Marcus Freeman's fault. This is Brian Kelly's part. Like Notre Dame went from here to here. Like it's a different kind of thing. And then that's why if Notre Dame would have played Georgia this year, they would have got, I mean, it would have been a similar story, obviously.
Right. So Notre Dame ND for Life says multi-billion-dollar endowment. There's no excuse for a lack of money. I don't think that's how the endowment works. That's my understanding of it. But
no, it's not how it works.
I think the point, but I think the point is that if Notre Dame wanted to raise the money for these things, they could. That's the way I feel. And just generally, as just kind of a big picture before we get into the portal stuff, is winning is a conscious decision, especially for a school like Notre Dame. It is a conscious choice how much they are willing to, how far they're willing to go to win a title. If they woke up today, tomorrow, whenever, and when I say they, I mean like Swarbrick and Jenkins and whoever, and they said, we are going to win a national title in the next 5 years. We are going to, and we are going to do everything we can to make it happen, right? Everything we can. We are going to spare no expense, no stone unturned. We're going to do that. They absolutely would, in my opinion. I don't think there's any question, but they don't, right? Because there's certain boundaries, right? Like they don't want to see themselves as a football factory, as ND for Life says. Like they don't want to view themselves that way. They want to be, and that's fine. That's their decision. It's their university, right? They are the ones in charge of this, right? Of the legacy and all these other things. They are in charge of things, of thinking through things in ways that fans don't have to, as football analysts don't have to. They have to. But I just think it's for them, it's a how far are we willing to go in doing so? And so we'll see, right? I mean, and they've made some strides. It's not like they haven't, right? It's not like they're sitting on their, like they've done some things, but it's like there's always the next.
Yeah, I think, just the one thing that people have to be conscious of is that, you're competing against teams and that do view it that way, right? And that do view it as totally like they don't care about anything else but football. They don't care about anything else but football. So when you do that, is it an unfair advantage? Yeah, probably, but that's just the reality. That's what it is, right? So, and that's college football these days, right? Which is I mean, look at it. It's funny because everyone points to oh man, this NIL, this new era and stuff like that. The rankings look the same. You know what I mean? The recruiting rankings look the same. The college football, TCU got in the party. That's great. Great for them, right? but I don't expect. And TCU might win the Big 12 every year for a long time if because Texas and Oklahoma. But like, listen, Texas and Oklahoma are just wasting their resources right now, right? Like, so there's different ways to kind of look at it. I don't know. All you have to do. I just think that at the very least right now, at least Notre Dame has a coach, like a head coach and a staff that they understand the assignment.
Yeah.
They understand the assignment. And I don't think you could say that for most of Brian Kelly's staff. So I think because of that, I think that's why, like you see like the blue chip ratio going way up and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They understand that that's what it's going to take. And yeah, it does. You're going to have to, the Keeleys, the Bowens, the Dante Moores, those guys got to end up in your class more, than they are. You can't go for 3 on those kind of things. But I mean, that's a whole different conversation that we're getting into, but that's just part of it. It's part of it.
Right. And just to kind of transition to the portal and all those other things and what Notre Dame is doing and how that affects is, to your point, like Brian Kelly complained about the deficiencies. He complained about it and saw it as a crutch. And Marcus Freeman said, okay, how do we capitalize? How do we take what is here and make that the selling point and make that the goal? As you said, they understand the assignment. And I think Brian Kelly understood the assignment and didn't want to do it. And Marcus Freeman does, and he is going to, and he'll do everything he can. And between the two of them, I think that's the vast difference, right? Is Marcus Freeman is going to do everything he can. Marcus Freeman is right now doing all he can to make Notre Dame as good as Georgia, right? And Brian Kelly just didn't have that fire, right? And it was just evident, right? So, all right. So transitioning over to how Marcus Freeman is doing that, making the roster better. Christian McCollum, I think Tom Loy at 247 had it first, but Christian McCollum put on the board yesterday, confirming the report that it looks like CJ Williams, former Notre Dame commit from last cycle, current former USC receiver, is going to visit over the weekend, right? And I have to think that if that visit happens, he's going to end up at Notre Dame because of the calendar is getting close, right? The semester is starting. He needs to find a spot and go. He's already been committed to Notre Dame, so obviously there's something there where there was something that he liked about Notre Dame in the last cycle. I think he always wanted to go to USC, and I think that's where USC wasn't a hard charging school last cycle early on. They came on late, which is why he started taking visits and that sort of thing. And then once Lincoln Riley came on, Lincoln Riley didn't offer him at Oklahoma, but I think he wanted him at USC to kind of take him away from Notre Dame and to kind of, it's like
and they didn't have a good class, so
kind
they
of
were
a PR
trying to
thing,
just
right? Like
I think it was like a modern day kid, and then and obviously too, like they didn't have from what they had, they could take him and it would be an upgrade on what they had, and I think that was the kind of thing. But I'm sure that he wasn't number one on his list, and he was always planning to kind of recruit over him.
And I personally, I think there's a reason why I think there's a reason why CJ Williams can be a good player and not a fit in that offense. Because if you look at that offense, they either want you to be big, like Brennan Rice, or they want you to be really fast, like Taj Washington or Jordan Addison's or Mario Williams, someone like that, who's like smaller, right? And I think that CJ Williams doesn't fit that. He is a Keenan Allen type, right? He's a start in the slot, find an opening, work through the defense, and closer to Amon-Ra St. Brown, I guess. Probably a little, maybe not as explosive as Amon-Ra St. Brown, but someone like that. And I think that doesn't really fit what Riley wants to do, right? And that's why he didn't offer him Oklahoma. And that's why when he was thinking of going to USC, I think we all had like private conversations in private, like, man, that's not a good fit. Like, and there's a reason why they didn't offer you a scholarship. And so he went there, tried it out, And I think what really hurt them with CJ Williams is they keep bringing in guys from the portal. It's like I'm going to have a chance to get developed here because you're just bringing in
You're just not going to get the reps.
Guys. Right. Yeah. How am I going to do that? So, well, what do you think of this, Jamie? I mean, I think on our board, especially, there's a lot of mixed. And first of all, I think that a conversation can be had about the football fit, but like on the board, people are whining about like, oh, the way he strung along Notre Dame in the recruiting process. Like, come on, like stop. Okay.
I didn't think he did that, to be honest.
I didn't think he did either. But even if he did, so what? He's here now. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's recruiting. Notre Dame does that to players all the time.
Very true. And this always happens too, where the old coach doesn't like it, but I love you, baby. Like, come on, like get in here. That happens all the time. That's sports, right? Like, and I mean, probably if I would say my most hated, maybe not the most, but up there as one of the most hated athletes for me is I can't stand Brad Marchand, who plays for the Boston Bruins. I can't stand him. Always hate him. The Vancouver Canucks played them in the Stanley Cup Finals. He's the ultimate pest. Whatever. I just when they play him, he's done like a ton of dirty stuff to the Canucks. He's done dirty stuff over the years. There's just a lot of things to not like about him. But guess what? If he got traded to the Canucks, I would be like, hell yeah, this is my favorite guy because he's that kind of player, and you just would love him anyways. And as Xander's mentions, like Peyton Bowen, I think to me is like, I think he did Notre Dame dirty. That's a different kind of scenario. And I would understand if they were like, it's best that we move on or whatever. But CJ Williams, yes, he was committed, but he was like talking about like taking visits and was kind of leaning towards him getting out there anyways. And by the way, Brian Kelly left. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't. And Del Alexander was like getting ripped on the boards all the time, and like was like basically, they were like nudging him out the door for like a year and a half. So this is his fault somehow that he wanted to stay home and whatever. Like and even if I agree with you. I don't think it was a great fit for him in USC at Lincoln Riley's offense. But I mean, you'd want to play in that other than I'm not sure about the quarterback situation at Notre Dame.
He had expressed concern about Notre Dame's offense, like going back to October. It was a thing that he brought up. I mean, he was very open about that.
Yeah. So I think, to me, that part doesn't even equate. Like, I don't care about that part at all. And the other thing is like Chauncey Stuckey is a different coach than Del Alexander. Right. And like the only kind of like attachment still is Tommy Rees. And if Tommy Rees is like, cool, let's take him, then take him. Right. Like that's really the main thing. Cause even Marcus Freeman wasn't the head coach really for very long. He was committed for like a week, basically. So anyways, I think one of the things with CJ Williams is he's much more like of a pro style type of receiver than an air raid receiver, especially if he's going to be a slot guy.
Yeah.
Like the slot guys for air raid, it's just different. They don't play with big slots unless it's like a tight end type, right? That's just not what they do. And I think that is CJ Williams' kind of best spot is to be a big slot type. And now I think if, for Notre Dame and what he can do, that's where I see his fit. I know you and I have talked about it way before when he was committed. Like that's always kind of where we thought his best fit is. I don't think that he is, someone who's going to come in and be like an automatic difference maker, but I think he's a guy who has a chance to contribute and be a really good player for Notre Dame, potential starter, and right now Notre Dame just doesn't have it's all unknowns really in Notre Dame's wide receiver room. Like I like adding Caleb Smith. I think Caleb Smith and that Sam Hartman combination, I think that could be a really good one, right? On the boundary there. I mean, Deion Colsey, yes, he stepped up late in the year, but he only had 9 catches on the year. Like,
Yeah.
we don't know enough about him then. And Jaden Thomas, I mean, obviously, Lorenzo Styles had a nightmare year in terms of dropping the ball, right? And so you don't know what you're going to get out of him. Do I think Notre Dame needs a speed guy more than they need a CJ Williams? Yeah, I do. But where is that speed guy? And if they're not getting it, I think they just need receivers. They need more bodies there. They don't have enough guys. And they're still in a position where if, say, they go in with the number of guys that they have into next season, all the guys that they currently have, even with the freshmen coming in, they're still a couple injuries away from like, hey, guys, we can't do one-on-ones today because we don't have enough receivers. Like, that's a bad spot to be in. That was part of the thing. And I think that's part of the thing that hurts a guy like Tyler Buckner and his development. It's going to hurt Sam Hartman and his adjustment to the offense. You need more receivers. So I'm all for it.
Yeah, I'm for it too. I in a vacuum, there's like 2 vacuums here. Like in a vacuum, CJ Williams in Notre Dame's offense, like I think it'd be very similar to Jaden Thomas, like you just brought up, right? And Jaden Thomas, I think, is probably going to end up outplaying his ranking, which is fine. So I don't. We're thinking as recruits, right? But yeah. I think he could be. I think he could have that role. The thing is that I think Rico Flores can do that as well. And I think that's kind of what his role in the offense is going to be also. And I do have concerns. Like, I feel like him and Jaden Greathouse are very similar. I see Jaden Greathouse as being more of a boundary and more of a, like, that guy than CJ Williams. But like the idea of those two being on the field together is like, that's a lot of good route running, not a lot of speed. You know what I mean? And so like, that's the only thing. Like CJ Williams in a vacuum, absolute take. It's like Rajon says, right? Like 6'2", 190, very high 4-star. Why would you pass on him 1 year later? I don't think you would, but it's just that because it's 1 year later, like if he was on the roster, would they have gone in on Rico Flores, who's the same kind of receiver, right? Maybe they would have. I don't know. Yeah. And I don't know what their ideas are. And so what I'm saying is, like, I think Rico Flores and CJ Williams are similar talents. You need 2 of those guys on the roster when you already have Jaden Thomas with 3 years of eligibility left. You have Lorenzo Styles in the slot, and so you have Tobias who can play slot. Jaden Greathouse, like I mentioned before. So that's the only thing. If they took him, I'm not going to be like, oh, that's a mistake or whatever, because it's, to your point, who is it, him and somebody else? Like who is it exactly? You know, like if like Andrell Anthony, who I know you really like, and is probably more of a vertical guy.
Yeah.
If he's not interested in Notre Dame, and we don't know.
We don't know. He just hasn't. It's like one of those like oh God, I can't remember the name of the Kent State kid, who, by the way, I don't think he's picked anyone yet.
Oh, Cephas?
Cephas, yeah. Dante Cephas. That guy, I think, would have been a great pickup, but I'm like, why isn't this guy chosen yet? He was in the portal like at midnight. You know what I mean? Like, so, and I haven't been following who he's all visited, but obviously he never came to Notre Dame. So I don't know what's going on with him, but unless you get a guy on campus, right? Like you just don't know. And I think right now, out of the people that Notre Dame has gotten to campus, they've gotten. So, I mean, you would have to think if he makes it to campus, because, like Jalen Catalon was going to come to think. And see, so Xander mentions that he's likely going to Penn State. He went to Penn State that first weekend. He hasn't gone yet. There's got to be something holding that up. And maybe it's money or NIL money. Maybe it's, I don't know. Maybe he can't get into school. I don't know what the deal is with him. Who knows? But I just know that it's weird that he hasn't picked yet. I think that, like, the key is getting enough guys on campus. I mean, obviously this is the last week, so it's, because January 18th it closes up again. They can still obviously add in May, and there's something that like that, but It's kind of now or never. So, and that's why it's like, it's weird. I think, there's still guys entering this week, but it's like, you better kind of get in right now. Like, I don't know why these guys are waiting.
Yeah. Joe Flaherty asked a question that I think is a good one. What happened with Anthony Lucas, or did Lincoln Riley get involved again? My impression of Anthony Lucas is he went to Texas A&M, which is for reasons that don't have to do with the school itself, but it was kind of an NIL thing. I think that's pretty clear. And he probably just doesn't. He probably doesn't have a ton of interest in playing in South Bend, And so because he can go to Notre Dame and start, he can go to USC and start, right? Like, why wouldn't he go to USC and start, right? So would I rather play in LA for whatever their NIL operation is, or would I rather go to Notre Dame for where their NIL operation is, right? Like, so it's not surprising to me that Anthony Lucas is choosing LA, which there's nothing. It's not a judgment. I'm just like going by off of what his behavior has been, right? That's my impression. Do you have any insight onto Anthony Lucas and whether the interest there or anything like that?
I don't know. I saw that a bunch of people saying that he was probably going to go to USC. I don't know why, but I just know that I don't think he ever really wanted to go to Notre Dame. So I don't think it was like, there's always a big difference between someone where like Notre Dame finished second and you're like, I was really thinking about it, but something else pulled him towards. But when someone makes a decision that, wasn't really based on school, like you said, and then also it will also seem like his parents were like, yeah, I really want you to go to Notre Dame, but he didn't really want to go to Notre Dame. The odds of a guy like that making like, you know what, a year from now, also a year, not that, whatever. I'm not going to get into his drug stuff that he got into, whatever. But, probably a sign that he's not the most mature guy yet in terms of where his maturity is. So I don't think that all of a sudden he was going to be a guy who's like, you know what, 4 for 40, man. Like that's like that. Yeah. I don't think that happens with too many guys. Like that's why I think like, so when Mike and I were mentioning it on Power Hour, like Cody Riggs, it made sense. First of all, it totally made sense. He picked Florida out the gate because they were way better than Notre Dame. They're developing DBs better, all this kind of stuff. Right. And then when he was like, yeah, you know what, I got to like set myself up for the future. And there's also opportunity at Notre Dame and Notre Dame's better. That made sense when he did that, but he was like mature. It's different than like a kid who's 17 making that decision when a kid is like 21. It's much different.
Yeah, he wanted to get his MBA from Notre Dame, which is like a lot of people who aren't football players do that. Yeah. So that was a very much a business decision. Plus, Bobby Brown was his uncle, I think.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah,
it was a family connection there as well. Yeah. It's same thing with Peyton Bowen, right? Like Notre Dame was supposedly the day before his decision, they were the choice, right? That was what was reported by Matt and all those other things. He told Notre Dame he was coming. He ended up picking 2 schools that weren't Notre Dame in the end. You know what I mean? Like, he chose Oregon and then he chose Oklahoma, right? And it's like the team that you said was going to be the pick, what wasn't the pick twice.
He was looking for reasons to not pick Notre Dame.
Right. He just didn't want to go, and that's fine. Like, so if he's into the portal this year or next year, I would not expect him to go to Notre Dame. I would not. And I don't even know if Notre Dame would talk to him, right? Like, it's just one of those things.
They might try to talk to him, but he might, and he might even show that he's interested. He might just like, that's the other thing. Sometimes people like the coaches and they like, they have good relationship with the coaches. They like all these other stuff, but they're like, oh man, I don't want to go to school in Indiana, or I don't want to go to school with this weather. Who knows? I don't know exactly whatever, but there had to have been multiple reasons why he didn't just end it and pick Notre Dame.
All right. Very priority Brendan is asking, so we're a year late with the hot stove wide receiver portal action. Does that mean Al Washington hits up the portal next year then? So basically what he's saying is Notre Dame needed a portal receiver or 2 last year, didn't get involved. And this year they've taken Caleb Smith from Virginia Tech, and it looks like they might land CJ Williams from USC. Right. So, and I think he's looking at it like this year, they need some D-line guys, haven't gotten any. And maybe you could talk about Vaughn's from Utah
Yeah.
State a little bit. But it, you know, like that's a situation where it's like, I think last year we had it in our minds, like they are definitely, like how many times did we say they are definitely taking at least one receiver next year, if not two, and they end up taking zero, right?
Yeah.
I could see that going in the way of the defensive line. So, I mean, first of all, where do you think Notre Dame was with Vaughns? I think he's the only one that has like real traction right now.
Yeah.
He's the one who visited. So
Yeah, he
where do you
visited
think
this
Notre
weekend,
Dame
yeah.
is with him? Yeah.
I mean, I don't know in terms of like what his process is. I mean, he's gotten a million offers and stuff too, and
Yes,
what
he
he's
has.
exactly what he's exactly looking for. I think he would be a big pickup because I think he is a guy who has a chance to play on third down, and they need like another guy, edge guy. If they don't get him, they need someone within the roster to kind of step up there. So that to me is like, rather than just thinking specifically, they need a Viper, they need this, they need somebody who can rush on third down, who can be opposite of Botello. Because right now, then it might be like, well, maybe Jalen Sneed's going to do it, or maybe it's going to be Joshua Burnham, or maybe it's going to be something like the ends on the roster. There isn't a lot of guys like those. Like Riley Mills isn't going to play end on third down, right? So they need something there, or they could really use, right? And I think one of the things too is that like with the portal and the wide receiver position this year as opposed to last year, well, Andre Anthony, CJ Williams, Caleb Johnson, the Iowa kid, those are all guys Notre Dame offered out of high school. Right. So they were undergrad guys that Notre Dame had offered. So, I mean, it turns out like Caleb Johnson wasn't going to be a guy who could get in and all that kind of stuff. Or Keegan Johnson, sorry. Yeah. Keegan Johnson wasn't going to be a guy who could get in anyways, but like they had a familiarity there with them. And that's why there was like more guys this year as opposed to last year. Those guys weren't in the portal last year. Like there wasn't I couldn't think of a guy that popped up that was like, hey, Notre Dame was really in on this guy. And there wasn't any of those guys last year. And then I think they wanted like some guys, but then guys couldn't get in, right? Like Purcell was a guy that was like they wanted, and I think they would have had a good chance at getting him, but he couldn't get in, right? So he ended up going to Florida or whatever, right? So I think so that's like part of it. And I also think it's like one of these things where it's like everyone's like, man, they got to get this in the portal. They got to get that in the portal. It's like, well, they got to go into the D lineman portal. There's not a lot of good D linemen in the portal. There just isn't. Yeah. Like, so out of guys that you could really like play at Notre Dame. So that's one thing too. Like people are like, man, Al Washington really needs to whatever. First of all, Al Washington, I know he has been after some guys, didn't get them or whatever. Or they didn't want to visit, or maybe they weren't fits or whatever. Or they didn't like them that much. But like, even if they get those guys that they just put on the list, I don't think any of these guys are like guaranteed guys. Like I've mentioned numerous times too, Braden Fisk is like considered like one of the top guys in the portal. He chose Florida State. I'm pretty sure he chose for a bag, but like I'm not sure was gonna start at Notre Dame. Like I think he's an all right player. He's a guy who would play at Notre Dame, be a rotation guy, be like a solid interior pass rusher. But I don't think he was a guy. I wasn't confident that he was going to be an every down starter for Notre Dame, especially at nose, right? And if I'm just looking at the list, like I mentioned in Six Thoughts last week, Jacob Lacey was like the 6th ranked defensive tackle in the thing. I'm like, well, Jacob Lacey couldn't play at Notre Dame. Like I like Jacob Lacey, but that was his thing. He wasn't getting time. So I mean, they could have probably used Jacob Lacey staying in school more than most of these other guys, right? And that's the kind of way I think you look at it. And then if we're looking at like edge rushers, there's just not a lot of guys there. There's not a lot of guys. It's why Byron Vaughn's has got like a million offers. Why do you think all these? It's like that's just what it is. It's really hard to get those guys. There's just because there's not a lot of guys this year, and it makes it harder in the portal, and that's why you need to develop and recruit and develop them. And that's why, like, Al Washington, the class they got this year, it matters because, like, if you look at like what Mike Elston has done this year, He got one 4-star kid who's very highly rated, and then 3 like lower ranked 3-star kids, which is a very Elston Notre Dame type of class. And the problem is like, and Dave might be able to be a little bit looser with who they get in the portal and all that too. But I promise you this, like that was one of the things this year. They didn't have Aiden Hutchinson. They didn't have those kind of guys. And those guys are harder to replace, right? Like they're harder to replace. And you have to, usually those guys are homegrown. There's just not many of those guys that you can get that are going to be like impact pass rushers.
Yeah. And there's a lot of options at receiver and teams can kind of pick. And that's not the case at D-line, to your point. So I don't know. We'll see with Byron Vaughn's, right? I think that's the best option in terms of just like the likeliest he's visited. Beyond that, they're probably going to have to wait till after spring and see how that shakes out. There's a question. Chris Waworka says, can we do a 24 target show one of these days? I think we're going to have to do that because I need to get more up to speed with it too. And I think, as we transition here from the 23 class to the 24 class.
For sure in February, I think once like kind of portal season is going to be done soon.
In between portal and spring ball is when.
Yes. And then I think, obviously there's going to be a junior day coming up for Notre Dame. So that's going to be big. And everything's going to kind of shift to then. I think right then we'll dive right into it. Maybe we'll look at each position and kind of go from there.
Chief Brody asks, what are the chances on CJ Williams? I think Notre Dame needs to complete more contested catches this year, the way Hartman loves a dangerous throw. I do think he's a good at the point of the catch guy. I do think he's very good at that. I think that's one of his strengths for sure. I think if he makes it to campus, they're going to land him. That's my opinion. If he doesn't come, then, obviously he's found another spot. But I think if he ends up on campus this weekend, I think he'll end up at Notre Dame. That's my opinion. What do you think, Jamie?
I think that's pretty fair. Yeah, that's how I would look at it. But I would agree too. I think he's a good contested catch guy. That's where he did most of his damage in high school.
Yeah. Joe Bro asks, how would you grade Al Washington? What do you say, Jamie?
I would grade him. I mean, I'd probably give him a B in the first year. I think he did a pretty good job. I also think, guys, please listen, subscribe to Irish Sports Daily Power Hour. We went over this in a long form where we talked about how he kind of didn't inherit a great group. Like he didn't get the defensive line equivalent of Joe Alt and Blake Fisher. And Jared Patterson. He did not. Obviously Isaiah Foskey's a great player, right? Jason Manuel is a good player, although he's banged up for pretty much most of the year. But like Howard Cross playing out of position, Riley Mills playing out of position because they have to, right? Because they have to. The Gabriel Rubio not quite ready yet, even though he showed some signs, not quite ready yet. And then look at like a lot of the guys that Elston landed as projects; those guys haven't turned out, and maybe they will eventually. But if you're waiting till like year 3 and year 4 for guys, that's too long. That's just how it is, right? So like guys like Anye, Aaronsberger, this would have been a perfect example, or perfect year for him to kind of make a leap. And like if he was going to make that thing, and he still might, but it's like
didn't happen.
There's not much time left for him, right? Yeah. And like Nana is a solid guy, but I don't think Nana has ever shown that he's going to be like a plus pass rusher guy. And if he was, that he would have been the starter at defensive end, and you could have kept Riley Mills inside. And Justin Alula is like a good player, but he's not. It's not like Justin Alula. Even if you compared him to say like Jameer Jones was in his last year was a better player than Justin Alula, right? And like he's definitely not on the level of Dalen Hayes or Julian Okwara. They didn't have those defensive ends. It's Khalid Kareem, right? Like Ade Ogundeji. They didn't have those guys. So it's hard because you're judging Al Washington. The talent isn't there. And that's because of what, Mike Elston recruited. And I think next year too is going to be kind of a thing where you want to see some guys make a jump, but they still aren't going to be loaded with NFL talent next year. And it's really going to be like a couple years from now that they hit. And it's like some this Bernie Cordero talking about how Vernon can't get to campus soon enough. I mean, Brandon Vernon, I don't think is a plug and play player. Like none of those guys are plug and play guys. So what really matters is they're all in the similar to maybe one of them cracks the rotation. One of the four guys they landed, right? Devin Houston, Boubacar Traore, and sorry, the other one's escaping me at the moment.
Amara Mukum?
Yes. But like, I think he's going to be really good, but he's also not a guy. He hasn't played a lot of football. So he's going to take some time. And so now it's like so important that guys like Gobera, Tyson Ford, Burnham, right? Who also is switching positions and never played D-line before. And now he's got to do this and putting on weight at the same time and all this kind of stuff. Well, I'm sorry, buddy, but you got to like be ready to play and help next year, because that's where Notre Dame is at with the defensive line, right? And that's kind of where they're at. And they need and it's a little bit like the roster in general, and the roster on defense is like all of the best raw talent in terms of raw recruited talent, the 4 and the 5-star kids, whatever, all those guys are going to be freshmen and sophomores next year, right? Yeah. Even though there's going to be a decent amount of guys returning that have experience, but like they aren't like the highly rated guys that look like they have NFL futures as much as the younger guys on the team. But you can't play too many young guys because then some of these guys aren't already. So I don't want to call it a transition year next year on defense, but it's definitely not going to be. I mean, Clark Lee, Mike Elston, those guys didn't recruit that well in the last little bit, and now you're kind of seeing what Notre Dame is having to deal with there.
Yeah, and so I to kind of transition off of that and just like the transition year, that you're talking about. I think that's something that was really important happened, and you guys touched on it on Power Hour as well, is getting Thomas Harper coupled with DJ Brown coming back.
Yeah.
It's funny you're talking about DJ Brown. I think DJ Brown is the Justin Adamalola of the secondary, or the Jameer Jones of the secondary, someone like that.
Totally.
Which as a someone to fill out what that group is going to be, I think is really good. And so Thomas Harper plus DJ Brown, I think that really solidifies what the secondary can be as far as the safety position next year, because you have Xavier Watts, who I think is kind of a man-free type. Ramon Henderson is also a man-free type, although they didn't really play him in that spot last year. But he was a swing guy, kind of like he can drop back and he can also play that nickel spot. Same with Thomas Harper. Thomas Harper can play the man-free spot because I think he's versatile enough. I think he's quick enough. And I think this allows them not to have DJ Brown do that as much, because I don't think that's his strength. But you have 3 guys there who can really move around and mix coverages and that sort of thing. And I think that just really helps, right? Especially when you consider the fact that Cam Hart is back with Ben Morrison and Clarence Lewis. Like, now you've got a lot of talent, B, a lot of experience too. And I think that really helps, in terms of just having the back end settled, right? It's not going to be a question mark. And I think it was a little bit last year going into it. Like, I think it was a little bit of a question mark. I think it's a lot more solidified. So I think that's really important. And that was something that I wanted to talk about. And I think the Caleb Smith thing is kind of under the radar. He, to me, is like is a little bit like A.T. Perry from Wake Forest, who did numbers with Sam Hartman. And I think everyone is like, can we get A.T. Perry in the portal too? Can he come with? I think they got him in Caleb Smith. Honestly, I think Caleb Smith can have a huge season next year with Sam Hartman. I mean, he could really do like 50 catches, like 800 yards, something like that. I mean, like a Kevin Austin type season.
Yeah.
Just because of the style of offense that they can run. So I think the roster on that end has really been rounded out for on the back end for defense and on the wide receiver position on offense, Jamie. And So you look at D-line, I've heard some discussions about guard. To me, I kind of don't even want to hear it with like the guard stuff. And like, they need to find someone in the portal. I really don't think they need to. I think
I don't think
between,
so.
yeah, I think between Strouth and Kristofic and Carmody and
Spindler and like,
Spindler
they should
and
have.
yeah,
They
and
got to be able
Coogan.
to find. Yeah,
If you can't find a good guard with
Coogan,
that
Ashton
group,
Craig. Yes, they
yeah,
should
if
be
you
totally.
if you can't, I that's like not acceptable to me. So I don't think they need a guard or anything like that. I think they'll be fine. But do you was there anyone that you kind of had your eye on as far as the portal or like what you saw could help Notre Dame? Like, is there some position that we're not talking about that I think that you think Notre Dame should really look in that spot?
I don't think so. Like, okay, so the guard thing. If there was some guy who was like, okay, so say Zach Zinter, Preston Zinter's brother, was like,
Yeah,
Jim Harbaugh's leaving. You know what? I'm out. I want to go play with my brother at Notre Dame. I'm like, well, Zach Zinter, heck yeah. Like, you would take him, right? Like, it would have to be that kind of situation for you to be at one of the other positions that we haven't talked about. You know what I mean? Like that kind of scenario where like some guy came in, he clearly wanted to play at Notre Dame, and that was like the right fit that you could just kind of throw him in there. Yeah, I think that could be, something important. But like, I mean, I would love if there was a defensive lineman that I was like, man, get this guy. Like, but I haven't seen out of the list of guys who've gone in, like, there hasn't been a lot of guys I've liked that I'm like, this guy's going to play and help for sure. I think like at linebacker, I just kind of think it would be bad for the program to not try to like lean into developing the younger guys.
Yeah.
And doing that. Like, so unless there was a guy, so I do really like the kid that USC got from Oklahoma State, Mason Cobb. And I actually watched a lot of him when I was watching Harper, and I was like, oh God, this guy's going to USC. Jeez, he's a stud. Like, and he's good, but like, there's not a ton of guys like that are in there. So I don't really see that. And I just kind of think they needed depth at safety. Check. I think they could use another receiver or two. So if they get Williams, great. If they could get a speed guy, great too, but I just probably not going to happen. And then at like tight end, you have this talent there that can develop. Like you said, you have these guys who can develop at guard. You don't need a running back, that's for sure. You got your quarterback. You got your quarterback out of there. And unless it was going to be like a top flight corner, a top flight linebacker, that you weren't going to go after those positions. So the D line would only be the only kind of spot that, you're like, they could definitely use guys to compete there. But then at the same time, like, who are you getting there that would be better than, is this guy going to be better than Tyson Ford by like week 3 of next year?
Yeah.
Is kind of like a question I would ask when you're looking at all these guys.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't seen too many guys that I would say, like, I think they're going to be better. So if you feel good about those other guys on your roster and kind of developing, then I think you can almost wait and see what's going on with like a Chris Smith type in the portal later on, because I don't know. I don't like the defensive linemen that are in the portal, to be honest. Not too many of them, that's for sure.
Yeah. And so I think it's kind of like with receiver last year, right? Like, who is it? Who are you going to get? And that's kind of the thing. So hopefully, I think for Notre Dame's sake, hopefully the Byron Vaughn situation works out. Hopefully that.
I should, sorry to interrupt, but I should say that, like, if they could get a Jordan Birch, I'd be like, yeah, that guy. That kind of guy. But you know, out of the guys that would be realistic they could get. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So I don't know. We'll see. Time will tell on that. But the you know, we should find out soon, just because the window is kind of closing on when these guys can do it. Yes, there is an airport nearby, Chris. I live right next to an airport. So that's what's going on there. So yeah, I think we'll leave it there, Jamie. Good show. I enjoyed it immensely. And thank you everyone for tuning in. That was really fun. If this is your first time watching the show, hit the like, hit subscribe button. You're going to want to come back on Thursday. We're going to have another show. I don't know what we're going to talk about yet, Jamie. We're just kind of hoping for news at this point of the year.
Yeah.
Hoping for news. If not, we'll come up with a sterling topic. I came up with this topic last night at around 8 p.m. So, and look how good this show was. Short notice, Jamie. That's what we're talking about. Look how good we were.
That's why you're the man.
And that's why we're both the men, Jamie. And that's why everyone loves us so much. All right. Thank you very much to everybody. You're going to want to come back on Thursday. We got another show coming up. Check out irishsportsdaily.com for info on like CJ Williams and the 2024 class and all those other things. Byron Vaughns, if there's news about him. So check that out. Check out irishsportsdaily.com. Hit the like, hit subscribe button, and we will talk to you again on Thursday.